A woman came into my clinic one Tuesday afternoon holding a tennis ball in her hand. She had heard that rolling the bottom of the foot over a tennis ball could help ease plantar fasciitis pain, and she wanted to make sure she was doing it correctly. I asked her to stand and place the ball beneath the arch of her left foot. Nothing intense, just gentle pressure while balancing her weight. As she adjusted her stance, she glanced toward a mirror on the other side of the room. Suddenly she froze. Then she looked at me and said, "I could swear something just shifted in my face." I turned to look, and surprisingly something had. That's where this story begins. Before we continue, I want you to try a small experiment. Take your thumb and press firmly into the center of your right foot's arch. Not the heel, not the front of the foot. Press into that softer area in the middle that rarely gets direct contact from most shoes. Hold the pressure for about 5 seconds. Some people will only notice the sensation in their foot. But others, and this is the detail that first made me stop and pay attention, may notice something happening somewhere completely different. Maybe a subtle feeling moving into the lower leg. Maybe higher than that? Just stay aware of whatever you notice, because what we're about to explore may completely change how you think about the connection between your face and the rest of your body. Over the years, 3 different patterns kept appearing in my practice, and they never seemed to fit neatly into separate explanations. I saw feet influencing facial structure. I saw tension in the shin linked to the cheek area. I even saw jaw issues that seemed to trace back to the arch of the foot. For a long time, I dismissed these observations as isolated coincidences. Interesting cases, certainly, but nothing more than unusual details attached to otherwise ordinary appointments. I don't believe that anymore. They're not separate events. They're different expressions of the same underlying process. And the structure responsible for connecting them is something most people have never heard about, even though it's running through their body right now. To explain it, let me tell you about another patient. Nothing solved the problem. His shins continued to burn. While examining him, I noticed something that initially seemed unrelated to his complaint. Actually, let me pause there, because this detail turned out to be more important than the shin pain itself. The tissues in the middle portion of his face, particularly beside the nose and beneath the eye socket, appeared unusually flat and loose. He was 54 years old, physically fit, and had healthy-looking skin. There was no obvious reason for that level of facial laxity. At the time, I simply made a mental note and continued focusing on his legs. A few weeks later, I found myself studying the work of Thomas Myers, an anatomist known for mapping what he calls myofascial meridians. These are long, continuous pathways of connective tissue that travel throughout the body, linking areas that traditional anatomy often treats as separate structures. Think of them as interconnected tracks running from one region to another. One of these pathways, known as the deep front line, begins at the sole of the foot. From there, it travels through the deep calf muscles, continues up the inner thigh, passes through the pelvic floor, moves through the diaphragm, rises into the deep muscles of the throat, and ultimately reaches the fascial attachments beneath the cheekbones and around the jaw. This isn't just a theoretical idea. These tissue connections can be observed, dissected, photographed, and measured. They're physically present. When I revisited the runner's records, something immediately stood out. His arches had collapsed significantly. Both feet showed a substantial reduction in the normal height of the medial longitudinal arch. And that loose, flattened facial tissue I had noticed weeks earlier sat at the very end of the same connective pathway that originated in those fallen arches. To make this easier to understand, try another quick exercise. Place a finger on the inside of your ankle, right over the bony prominence on the inner side. Now slowly trace upward along the inside edge of your shin. You'll feel a distinct line of tissue and muscle. Keep moving upward across the inner portion of the knee and into the inner thigh. What you're tracing doesn't suddenly stop at the hip. That pathway continues through deeper structures hidden beneath the surface. It travels through the pelvic floor, follows structures alongside the spine, passes through the breathing diaphragm, continues up the front of the throat, and eventually connects into the tissues anchored beneath your cheekbones. With a single movement of your fingertip, you've just traced the path of the deep front line through your own body. And once you begin to recognize that connection, many seemingly unrelated symptoms start to look very different. When I first came across this concept, I struggled with it. The idea that something happening in your feet could influence the appearance or function of your face sounded completely unreasonable. So, how would you explain it to someone sitting across from you at dinner? One comparison that helps is gravity. Think about the relationship between the Earth and the Moon. They're separated by nearly 250,000 miles, yet the Moon has enough influence to move entire oceans every single day. There isn't a physical rope connecting them. The connection exists through a field of force that transmits tension across distance. The body's fascial network behaves in a surprisingly similar way, just on a much smaller scale. The arch of your foot and the arch beneath your cheekbone may be separated by several feet, but they're linked through a continuous system of connective tissue. They're part of the same tension network. When the arch of the foot gradually loses its structure and begins to collapse, the tension throughout that network changes. The effect isn't sudden or dramatic. It's usually slow, subtle, and cumulative. Imagine a camping tent. If one stake loosens little by little, the entire structure starts to sag, not immediately, but over time. Or picture a sprinter launching out of the starting blocks. The power generated in the feet doesn't stay there. It travels upward through the ankles, knees, hips, spine, shoulders, and arms. Every segment contributes to the final movement. If one link in that chain isn't doing its job properly, some of that force is lost along the way. The athlete may notice reduced performance, but the real issue isn't necessarily where the problem becomes visible. It may originate several joints away in a place nobody would think to investigate. In this comparison, your facial tissues are like the sprinter's arm position, while your foot arch acts as the starting block. The structure connecting everything is fascia. One researcher who has spent decades examining this tissue is Dr. Carla Stecco at the University of Padua. Her work helped reveal something many earlier anatomists overlooked. Historically, fascia was often removed during dissections because the primary goal was to expose muscles, nerves, and organs underneath. It was frequently treated as little more than packaging material. Stecco's team took a different approach. Instead of removing the fascia, they preserved it. What they found was remarkable. Rather than isolated fragments of tissue, fascia formed extensive, uninterrupted sheets that linked distant regions of the body together. Even more important, those sheets could transmit mechanical forces across multiple joints. This wasn't simply a theory. It could be observed and measured. When tension was applied to one portion of a fascial structure, movement and displacement could be detected elsewhere along the same tissue pathway. The fascia wasn't acting as passive wrapping. It was actively carrying information through tension. Calling it responsive almost feels insufficient. A better description might be communicative. Just as a wire carries vibrations from one point to another, fascia appears capable of transmitting mechanical signals throughout the body. That perspective completely changed how I interpreted many of the cases I was seeing. Which brings me to another patient. She was a 61-year-old professional cellist who had spent more than 3 decades performing at a high level. For the previous 8 years, however, she had been dealing with chronic jaw pain caused by TMJ dysfunction. Over time, she had tried nearly every conventional treatment available. Night guards, targeted jaw exercises, Botox injections into the masseter muscles, even orthodontic adjustments designed to change her bite alignment. Each treatment produced some improvement, but the relief never lasted. The pain always returned. Ironically, she didn't come to see me for her jaw. She came because of neck discomfort. As far as she was concerned, the jaw issue was a lost cause. Before discussing her long treatment history, let me jump straight to the detail that no one else had evaluated. I examined her feet. Both arches had significantly dropped. The navicular bone, often considered the keystone of the foot's arch because it sits near the highest point of the structure, had descended on both sides.